Hey there, everyone. Welcome to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the Prono. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the Prono, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There's a lot of young professional fish in the sea, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. I'm excited to welcome Julio Hernandez to the show today, coming to us live from Greenville, South Carolina. Julio is the kind of guy that you hear his name so many times in town and you think, I should probably reach out, which is exactly how it played out for us. I kept seeing his name pop up at various events throughout town, and finally, I just reached out. Thankfully, I did, because Julio has become a friend and mentor to me as I've grown my business, and I'm so excited to have him here with me today. As assistant to the president for community outreach and engagement at Clemson University, Julio spends much of his time building relationships across the upstate, working to make Clemson and the upstate a more inclusive place. While he has been at Clemson for over 6 years, his higher education background goes even deeper. His work in higher education organizations throughout his career have exposed him to working with current and future young professionals, and I invited him on the show today because he knows a thing or two about the next generation of leaders. Julio, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Camber. Thank you for having me. It's an honor, and it's been exciting to see your journey and how you made these big dreams. You've been dreaming bigger and bigger, and how you turned those into reality. So congratulations! It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And as always, every time I see you, you always have your Clemson gear on. So we've got the orange tie and the Clemson pin. So all the Clemson fans out there listening or watching, he is wearing that proudly.
I got my orange socks.
Oh, and orange socks. I missed it. Well, the people who are watching it will be able to see. So let's get started with what I like to call a little lightning round. So just answer in a couple sentences, and then we'll dive into the meat of our discussion today. But tell us something that is not on your resume. So maybe something people wouldn't know you just by looking at a piece of paper.
Yeah, something that that's real important to me, Camber, is every morning on my way to work, I send 3 text messages to somebody to let them know that I think about them. I look at my phone and see maybe someone's birthday is coming up, and so I keep in mind notes of what's going on with the people in the community. And then on my way home, I at least call 2 or 3 people on my way home. And I think that's important. There's a lot of, hopefully some good things in my resume, but those are some of the things I'm most proud of.
Yeah, I love that. And that's something I noticed when we first met. I think you mentioned something about how you call people pretty frequently. And I think that that's harder as we get older to keep tabs on those people that are close to us, because we're so busy and we get inundated with all the things that are happening in our lives. And so I remember that being very intentional. That was kind of the word I remember writing down after our conversation.
Correct.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yep.
What is your favorite productivity tool?
This might sound a little abstract or a little vague, but it helps me a lot. Is on my Outlook calendar under the banner, it'll pop up at 6 or 6:30, and it's recorded every single day, throughout the year, and it's the phrase, make a difference today. And so why I think that's very productive, you look at, when we look at our Outlook calendar, it's easy to see maybe a 9 o'clock or a 10 o'clock or a 3:30 or whatever all those times. But when I look at that at the very beginning, it really sets the tone of, yes, I've got all these appointments, but where am I going to make an impact today? How am I going to make a difference today? I don't think about that tomorrow. I don't think about yesterday. I think about that day. And all of a sudden, I see my day, and I see my meetings, and I see the people in my day and through a different lens, and helps me kind of put priority where I can make the most impact. And for me, that's been such an effective tool to try to make a difference each day.
I love that. I mean, it's really a mindset concept, right?
Yep.
And it's very, I think it feeds off of the first question that you answered, so that we're sensing a theme. So last part of the lightning round, tell us about a lesson that you learned as a young professional.
Something I tell a lot of the students back at Clemson and a lot of the Generation Z and even millennials is when I look back at my career, I'm so glad that I was able to embrace the grind. That was important, because that embracing the grind helped me collect a lot of experiences. Some of those experiences were not good, and some of those experiences were amazing. And I remember all these things. And now when I go into a meeting, especially on the work that I was involved with diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm able to go back into those experiences that I had. So, what are those jobs that nobody wanted to take that I said, I'll take it and I'll make sure I do the best job ever. Whether it been getting, coffee for somebody, I want to be the best person that gets the coffee, or whatever that job is embrace the grind and do it really well. And now I look back in my career, I'm so glad that I did that. And I try to pass that on to the next generation to really embrace the grind, because it will provide some profound experiences.
Right. I love that too. And it's good for me to hear that as well, because sometimes you're stuck in it and you can't see the other side, right? So that's reassuring for me as well. So Julio, give us a little bit more of a background that we may not have covered in your intro, because I obviously shared a little bit more about how we know each other, but anything else about you from a professional standpoint that you'd like to share, or anything more about your work that you're doing at Clemson? Because it's pretty amazing, the stuff that you get to do every day.
Absolutely. I think I have the best job in the world to be able to represent the university, to go into the community. One of the things that I really enjoy about my work, Camber, is that I'm given the opportunity to go into to all 46 counties, South Carolina, and do a deep dive to understand and see how everybody does have a story, right? Communities, peoples, just so many different people that even make up the community. Everybody's got a story. And so I remind myself of the importance of doing asking more questions, really getting to know people, and not just making assumptions. What I see outside from a community perspective or individual perspective is what story is happening with that individual, whether it be a Generation Z, millennial, X, or baby boomer, a veteran, any whatever that is. What is the story, and how can I learn from that? And I'm very just blessed to be able to go all over South Carolina and maybe be able to bring that story back into Clemson to see how we can make some partnerships, or how we can collaborate with each other. Because as you know, Clemson has a land grant mission. We serve all the citizens of South Carolina. So we've got a lot of great things happening at Clemson, but we want to make sure that we don't keep it at Clemson, that we make an impact in our state.
Thank you for sharing that. I think for at least the people that are watching locally, Clemson is a huge name, but nationally, it's gotten so much recognition. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is in part because of that, right?
Yep.
Like Clemson's gotten this wide claim recognition. Yes, football is popular, but it's the work that you're doing in here to really expand, correct? And make a name for Clemson.
Absolutely.
Beyond the athletics.
Yeah, absolutely.
It helps.
Athletics they're doing great things. When I go back to campus, I tell you what, it's one of my favorite days. I do a lot of work out in the community, but going back to campus and seeing the students engage with their professors, or the Generation Z. I'm again talking about ages 8 through 23. Right? We're talking about, so I see a lot of that firsthand when I go on campus, and to see them work together with millennials, so in many cases are the supervisors, right? Those supervisors.
Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, right. So to see them work together to find, to look at a particular issue through a different lens and come up with critical solutions. I tell you what, as a Generation Xer, I feel like I've got this cool front seat and I could see this in action. So I'm very optimistic how what the future holds, especially when you're surrounded among some of the best and brightest students around the country.
Yeah, well, I love that you brought that up, the concept of having all these generations and you have this front row seat to watching them interact on a college campus and beyond. But we're going to talk a lot more about that. So you just set the stage nicely for the rest of our conversation. So thank you. And as you know, we are talking about the young professional generations today, which makes up part Gen Z. And of course, that number is going to rise. And then we still have millennials who are in that young professional workforce. These two generations are going to make up 2/3 of the workforce by 2030. So help us kind of dive in a little bit more by talking about this from a higher education and diversity angle. What does this mean?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So as I mentioned before, Generation Z, we're talking about students individuals ages 8 through 23, and millennials ages 27 through 42. Just based on my experience in the community, I'm seeing, especially when it comes to Generation Z, Camber, just the diversity growing in that particular generation. I'll mention, for example, here in Greenville, there's an amazing elementary school called Mountview Elementary. And when you walk into that elementary school, you see all the flags representing all the students that attend that school.
Wow.
It is amazing.
Yeah. How inclusive, just to walk in and see that.
Principal Qualls gets it, and you can just feel the international community. But that's happening more and more in that Generation Z. Or if you go further down, another elementary school, Blythe Academy. I was just there recently, and students speaking not just Spanish but French, and just different languages. Right. What was most impressive was this young lady. When I went to visit Blythe for Career Day, that young lady, her first language was English, but spoke to me, fourth grader, I want to say again, spoke to me in Spanish through my entire visit, right? And so what I want to really emphasize that this Generation Z, from seeing from a higher education perspective, is being more equipped and being more prepared to kind of view, to tackle on and be prepared for, this global world that we're going to be taking on. And also going back to our Clemson students, I see our Generation Z students having this mindset of wanting to learn and grow. They too also embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. When I visit some of the student organizations, I'm encouraged. First of all, I'm surprised, and then I'm encouraged that in a lot of these committees, Camber, they have a diversity, equity, inclusion committee within that. So there's maybe a fundraising committee, there's a marketing committee, but then they have a diversity, equity, inclusion committee. This is Generation Z looking at these issues already, which is pretty impressive. And then, with millennials, I'm just in awe how well they work together, how they collaborate very much. I think of one young man in particular named Christian. I'll be chairing a certain committee, and to see him take the lead, I want to make sure that everyone else's thoughts are also put into the conversation. It's very, very exciting to see.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your positive attitude about these generations, because a lot of times, as you know, in the media, we're the ones that get talked about in a more negative view, right? I think people are still questioning Gen Z because there's only so many 5 or 6 years worth of them in the workforce already. But you're seeing them all the time from elementary on. And just an interesting note, I was reading Z Economy recently. I don't know if you're familiar with it or if you read it, but there's a whole chapter, really there's a whole, I think, part 2 of the book is all about diversity, and Gen Z is the most diverse generation out there. And they're looking, when they look at companies to work for, if there's not a diverse element to their community, they won't even look, because it's just not worth it to them, because they have grown up in this environment where it's normal to have DE&I committees, and they think that there should be. So I thought that was kind of an interesting note. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
That's actually true. Generation Z, as they transition to the workforce, if anybody is a business owner or is a recruiter or is interested in this subject, Generation Z will be looking for more authentic approach for companies to show that they really mean what they say when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. I was thinking even of a young man that works at TD SYNNEX. I had a conversation with him last week, and one of the things that really stood out to me was how much he enjoyed working at TD SYNNEX. And he said how he was part of a employee resource group or business resource group, and how the TD SYNNEX encouraged this particular ERG to be involved in the community. So not only are they obviously doing great things, doing the work 8 to 5 or, whatever the hours, but they also encourage this individual and a lot of their employees to be involved in their community. So it just really highlights the good work that companies like TD SYNNEX and others are doing to really value diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace.
Great, thank you. And I love that you came with these kind of stories and personal anecdotes of these young professionals that you have worked with. So great preparation. So for most of the listeners on this show, they are business owners or leaders looking for proactive ways to increase retention and to find the best talent. How do they do that in a post-pandemic workplace when they're looking at these people, this generation that you're seeing every day? How do they do that?
Great question. I love that. When I think about companies that students or young people will say, I want to go work for. How many times have you heard, I want to go work at Apple, right? Or I want to go work at Google. And, when you look at their strategy, it's not sometimes as intentional to go after them, but it's the culture that they set. The culture of inclusion, as I want to really highlight, that's very important. Their work culture is not rigid. They try to set a culture of innovation. You can even work remotely, but that culture of inclusion is important, Camber. And then we're not talking about inclusion. It's not just like counting heads and saying, I want, okay, I have a Latino person here, I have this race, that race. It's not about counting heads. Right. It's about making every head count. In other words, making sure that I invite all of you to the workplace, because inclusion, what that does is it says, I want all of you, because I know when I have all of you, I will be able to tap into the diversity of thought that you bring and so many other brings. And when you bring that, people want to be part of that. People want to work at a place like that.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I love that the phrase you just said, don't just count heads, make every head count. That's really profound when I think about that, because a lot of times in the workplace right now, at least what you're seeing on a big level for these large corporations, you have some people in the experienced generations, as I like to call them, experienced professionals, that this is not a normal concept for them. This is not a normal way of doing business. So we kind of talked a little bit about these business owners and leaders who are watching the show, and some of them who are maybe not as open or relevant or comfortable with this diversity of thought concept. And you mentioned this transparency element. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. One of the great things, Canberra, about diversity of thought, that we're all learning. We all bring things from, see things through a different lens. And so when we create a stage of inclusion, we're able to get feedback of what really matters to our people. A good example, let's think about during this time, last couple of years, many of us work remotely, right? What did that do for many of our individuals? Well, many of them have stated that they're able to have more of a work-life balance. Now we've come into the workplace, and now is that a priority? I'm sure that is to employers and companies, but what does that look like for everyone individually, right? It's going back to what we talked about. Everybody has a story. Everybody brings something different to the table. Referencing back again, Apple and Google,
right.
They didn't intentionally choose to do work remotely, but it was just the culture that they wanted to have is create one that says, I want all of you, what's important to you. And so I think that's just a good conversation to be able to create employee resource groups or business resource groups, because there's so much knowledge and data right there that when we engage those groups, we learn the direction we should be going.
Yeah, and ERGs, I mean, that's something that has, I think, gotten very popular in the last 10 years, but once again, just knowing this generation that we're kind of targeting in our conversation today, they are looking for that. So companies and businesses that are watching and listening, they need to know if you're a small company and you maybe haven't tapped into that as a resource yet, you should, right?
Correct.
It's something that's really important. And you touched on a lot of things that kind of go into my next question, which is really talking about, since you've worked with so many young professionals throughout your career, what are the key findings that you've learned about these young professionals, about what they want and need to be successful in the workplace? I mean, you've touched on culture. You've talked about work-life balance, which is a very big buzzword these days. But what else are they looking for? And maybe you might even need to answer it in two parts, looking at the college Gen Zers and the younger Gen Zers, because it's different.
Absolutely. There's many. The four that stand out to me, it's definitely is a culture where people see that how they make a difference, right? How are they connected to the work, and how is the work impacting their community, and how is their work impacting the world? That's going back to our Generation Z and millennials. They're very mission oriented, very mission driven. So that's important. Two, the value of growth and development. What kind of mentorship opportunities does an organization provide? I think about a young man at Clemson. He's a millennial.
Yeah.
We have a program at Clemson University called See You Grow. It's an intentional program to make sure that you feel you're part of the university, but that we value the talents that you have. So not only can you contribute to the mission at Clemson, but also we want to intentionally see you grow. That's the name of the program. And I think about that young man, about how as I work with him, I try to follow the concept, what I know, you know. And so that's something I think that we're seeing more and more of our millennials and Generation Z of looking for an environment where they can see themselves grow and people are helping develop work-life balance. I'm going to say that again.
Yeah.
One of the things I've seen especially with Generation Z, they take on so much. The expectations sometimes can be way up there. When I talk to students, they'll be stressing out about certain exams and just all these different things you're juggling. Well, and that's great. They're handling well, but eventually that can catch up to anybody. So how can organizations and employers put work-life balance, mental health as a priority in their organizations? And last but not least, I want to just again reiterate inclusive culture. When you feel you belong, the employer is able to tap into the gifts that you have inside. So those things, making a difference, or our Generation Xers and millennials, can they see themselves make a difference in their workplace? Do they feel that they're valued and they can grow? Does companies have a work-life balance, and do they provide an inclusive culture?
Great. Out of all of those things that you mentioned, Julio, what is something that for somebody listening today, what's a tip that they can start applying immediately out of those offerings? Is it starting a resource group? Something that they can say, all right, this is an action step for me, because culture takes a long time to create. An inclusive culture at that takes a long time to build, but what can they start doing immediately to start seeing those results in the future?
Something I was thinking about, Camber, is, I'm as we see generation, let me back up. As baby boomers are retiring, Generation Xers are stepping in, right? And taking some of the more responsibilities. But Generation Xers will start retiring very soon.
Yeah, they will.
So my question is, how are we connecting a leadership pipeline and working with our millennials, right? And to your question is, when we can look at our place of employment and we ask ourselves, do we have systems in place where we provide a leadership pipeline, where we provide mentorship pipeline? That's something that could be done today, whether it be a small company or a large, company. That concept, is what I know, you know, and how can you build that? That's something that I see can be very effective.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And that's, essentially what we do at the OProno is helping them build these next leadership pipelines, because these are the future leaders. The people that you are working with every day, which is, again, one of the reasons I wanted you selfishly on the show, because you have this lens that a lot of America doesn't, because they're not seeing such large quantities of these age groups right now.
Correct.
So one more thing that I want to mention before we wrap things up is, you had talked earlier, you're seeing, before the show, we talked a little bit about, you're seeing people come on campus either for tours, whether it's a football weekend or whatever the case may be. You're seeing Gen Zs being accompanied by their parents. You've talked a lot about these positive interactions that you're seeing between the generations, but there's also some tension between generations, right? Tell us a little bit more about those. I know this is kind of I'm throwing you a curveball here, but tell us a little bit more about those interactions and what you see when you're seeing these Gen Zers accompanied by maybe their millennial parents or their Gen X parents. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a great opportunity where knowledge and experience comes together, right? You see Generation Z and you see millennials, but particular Generation Z, we talked about how not only appreciate diversity, equity, inclusion, and they are also more technology savvy, right? So you're just bringing, and they're very collaborative. So there's a lot of good things here. And, many of the parents are Generation Xers. I always call them the generation of resiliency, right? And I'm from that generation where both of our parents were working, right? So we had to kind of figure out a lot on our own. So you think you bring these two worlds together. And so my always question, it's a more rhetorical question, is how can they work closer? Because when that happens, when you bring experience, you bring all the things, all the mistakes and the victories that Generation Xers have had, as parents, and they and find a way how to collaborate with Z, who again are just incredible human, beings and just an incredible workforce that's coming. Can you imagine, Camber, the possibilities of what that can look like? I think, again, I'm very optimistic, and at the same time, it could be a challenge, because the challenge is if it doesn't happen, what a missed opportunity.
Yeah. I love that. I don't love that it would be a missed opportunity. I think that your hope is something that we all should feel, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do in both of our jobs. We want to help other generations understand the value that other generations can bring. And it goes back to what we've talked about the entire time: inclusive thought, really understanding why somebody is the way that they are and how you can bring your skill sets together and provide even better results is kind of how I look at it. Right. So before we wrap up today, Julio, we've had a great conversation. I wish that we could keep talking for another 30 minutes, but in the interest of time, anything else today that you want to share that we didn't touch on? You've shared so many great stories about young professionals that you have worked with. Anything else that you want to share today that we didn't touch on?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I hope what we share, people will look at their places of employment and say, maybe there's one thing that maybe I can apply or do, or at least begin the research, right? But in the end, it's about how can we make a difference with our people. We think companies, big or small. In the end, it's about people. Yeah. And everybody has a story. And how can we ensure that we bring everybody to the table? Because I think when people come together, we'll surprise ourselves with how much magic that can bring. And last but not least, there's a thought that I remember and I try to bring with me is a thought that says, a satisfied life is better than a successful life. Because our success is measured by others, but our satisfaction is measured by our own soul, mind, and heart. So just keep that in mind. I try to keep that in mind, that it's how can we make a difference with our employees, how we can make a difference in our community. Because in the end, people will measure success, other people will measure your success by whatever metrics. But the important thing is having a satisfied life, because that's, I think, a key to a happy life.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end the interview. Julio, thank you so much again for being on The Great Retention.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, again for joining us today on The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the U.S. workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this next decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders we need for the future? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit and retain young professionals. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcast. This helps others know where to find episodes about this topic. And last but not least, don't forget to share with your coworkers. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.